Mayor Campbell is absent on civic business. Councillor Barnes. Here. Councillor Cadman is absent. Councillor Green. Here. Councillor Ladner. Here. Councillor Louis. I'm sorry.
I am here.
In the chairs. Councillor Lewis. Here. Councillor Roberts.
Here.
Councillor Stevenson. Here. Councillor Sullivan. Councillor Woodsworth. Here. You have a quorum, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Green, I believe you have some introductions.
Thank you. First of all, I'd like to, on behalf of all of us, welcome Frances Beulah back from Afghanistan, where I understand she did a magnificent job. It's my pleasure today to introduce Catherine Chernoskas, who's going to play solo flute for us today, and she's going to be playing a sonata for solo flute from Barbara Pentland, who is a BC composer. Now, Catherine has studied in University of Toronto and in Rome and in Salzburg, one of the places that we beat out for the Olympics. But I understand they have very good music schools there. She's also going to talk a little bit about the piece that she's going to be playing, so welcome.
Thank you. I'm here today to thank the City of Vancouver for its support of the Canadian Music Centre, which is celebrating its 45th anniversary this year. And incidentally, also, I'd like to thank the City of Vancouver for giving me my first employment as a musician when I moved to Vancouver in 1973. Barbara Pentland indeed was one of Canada's greatest composers. In fact, the City of Vancouver recognized Barbara Pentland by declaring Barbara Pentland Day on September 27, 1987. When Barbara Pentland died in the year 2000, she left a substantial amount of money to the Canadian Music Centre to help promote Canadian composers. And I'm proud to say that one of the first projects that will be undertaken using that money is to copy her handwritten music into computer music notation, and you can see a sample of both on the screen and on your handout. And I finally want to thank Douglas College for giving me a year's leave from my day job so that I can undertake this work of copying Barbara Pentland's music.
Thank you. Councillor Green, you have some more comments?
Yes, I just want to also thank the Alliance for Arts and Culture who coordinate these cultural presentations for us, and they're doing a fantastic job.
Thank you. Before we move on, I'd like to welcome 20 students and their teachers from the Pacific Immigrant Resource Society. I believe they're with us today. And now we have a Green Power Certificate presentation from BC Hydro. The presenter from BC Hydro will be Bruce Sampson, the Vice President of Sustainability. And perhaps I'll introduce the subject a little bit. City of Vancouver has purchased 443 megawatt hours of green power certificates as part of their climate change initiative. And each GPC has a face value of 1 megawatt hour of electricity generated at a qualified green generation facility into the BC Hydro grid. This commitment will provide a strong signal to independent power producers that green energy is in demand. And BC Hydro's GPC program is committed to encouraging the development of more green energy in the province and has a voluntary target of meeting 50% of new energy demand through green sources. So, thank you.
Great. My speech can be a little shorter now. My name is Bruce Sampson. I'm the Vice President for Sustainability at BC Hydro. And I'm sure some of you are aware our vision is to be North America's leading sustainable energy company. But to achieve that vision, we need partners like our customers and partners like the City of Vancouver who are willing to put their environmental principles into action. And so I'd just like to commend the City of Vancouver for its leadership in moving to a sustainable future and purchasing green certificates from us. This purchase helps stimulate the growth of the independent power producer, the small hydro projects and biomass projects that produce this power. So we're hoping that your leadership will be recognized by other communities within BC, and it'll stimulate more demand for this type of activity. And I'd also like to commend the City of Vancouver for its efforts on focusing on energy efficiency. You've done a great job in replacing your exit lights with LED lights, which I gather has saved you over $100,000 in energy costs. And you're looking for a range of other options to improve energy efficiency. So it's great to see the leadership, and I'd just like to present you with this.
Well, unfortunately, Councillor Cadman, who's our lead on Cool Vancouver, is not with us today. That normally would have received the certificate, but I'd be happy to step in his place and receive it.
Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Green. Next, Council is required to meet in camera today, later this day. The reasons and authority under the Vancouver Charter are listed in the agenda. Could we have a motion? Seconder? All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously. The minutes. Minutes 1 are minutes of the regular council meeting following city services and budgets of March 25th. Councillor Lewis is chair. Do you have any comments?
Good afternoon, Your Deputy Worship. There were 4 items on the agenda. The first item was the 04 operating budget, final estimates. Council approved the final revenue and expenditure estimates for the 04 operating budget. The second item was the 04 property tax options, averaging effects. We received a report on that matter for information purposes only. The third item, and perhaps the most significant and exciting item of the meeting, was our approval of the final arrangements for the development of the affordable housing component of Bayshore Gardens by the Performing Arts Lodge, otherwise known as PAL. We approved a grant for the project to match a grant from BC Housing. The fourth and last item was the review of our graffiti program. We postponed a decision on the recommendations. We asked staff to report back on a proposed plan for monitoring the use of chemicals under the program, and we also asked for further investigation of the potential use of the graffiti removal van. And with those comments, I would move approval of the minutes.
Second? Seconded by Councillor Woodsworth. All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously. Minutes 2 are minutes of the regular council meeting following the Planning and Environment meeting of March 25th. Councillor Roberts, as chair, do you have any comments?
Yes, in these minutes cover the items 1 through 6, and the first one was that council received a verbal report from planning on a new significant rezoning application for 33 West Pender. The second item was regarding a nuisance and dangerous building at 1942 West 2nd Avenue. Council directed staff to file a 336D notice against the title to the property at 1942 West 2nd Avenue to warn prospective purchasers of bylaw contraventions and that there is an order of council against the property. Council directed that city building inspector to withhold action with respect to demolishing the building and erecting a chain link fence for 60 days to provide time for the owner to apply for the required permits. On the third item, council directed staff to file a 336D notice against the title to the property at 2534 East Georgia Street to warn prospective purchasers of bylaw contraventions against that property. The fourth item, council directed staff to file a 336D notice against the title to the property at 435 East 50th Avenue to warn prospective purchasers of bylaw contraventions. The fifth item was regarding the City of Vancouver's advertising policy. Council received for information the report on the City of Vancouver's advertising policy and requested that staff report back on strategies and budgeting implications to include more media outlets relating to the gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgendered, and other diverse communities in the city's advertising policy. And the last item was regarding the provincial cuts of funding to women's centers. Council approved a motion to urge the provincial government to rescind plans to cut core funding for women's centers on March 31st, and further urge the provincial government to continue to provide core funding for all 37 women's centers in British Columbia. Unfortunately, they did go ahead with those actions, and I'm sure our council will be dealing with that more in the future. And with that, I move that those minutes be adopted as read.
Second? Councillor Bass seconds that motion. All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously. Minutes 3 are the minutes of the public hearing, March 25th. Any corrections to the minutes? Seeing none, would somebody move adoption of the minutes? Moved by Councillor Lewis. Second? Councillor Bass. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Minutes 4, the minutes of the regular council held April 6th. Any corrections to the minutes? Seeing none, would somebody move adoption of the minutes? Moved by Councillor Lewis. Seconder? Somebody? Councillor Woodsworth. All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously. We need a motion to go into committee of the whole. Moved by Councillor Woodsworth. Second? Councillor Bass. All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously. We will now consider the consent items before the report reference item. We have administrative reports A1 to A14, the reports of recommendations from officials from Vancouver's for council's consideration. We have received a request to speak on A8, and due to the heavy agenda items this coming Thursday, I would suggest we should defer that item to either May 4th or 6th, depending on the workload from staff's indication. So, Councillor Ladner.
Your Deputy Worship, deferring that to a different date on this Thursday may be a problem for a number of people who are probably expecting to come on Thursday. Can we deal with that, Mr. Clerk? So they know that they don't have to show up on Thursday?
Well,
just enough notice?
The problem is Thursday's agendas are very heavy, and it does not look possible to add any business to those meetings.
Fair enough, but can we let the people know who are going to be speaking?
The people if we have names and phone numbers, we certainly will let people know who have let us know.
Well, I would encourage you to do that as early as possible because I know a number of people are planning on attending on this Thursday.
Thank you, Councillor Loudner. Is there anyone holding any of the items A1 through 14, less A8? Councillor Stevenson.
A14?
A14. Councillor Roberts.
A9.
A9. Any others? Seeing none.
No.
Oh, Councillor Bass.
Councillor, 1, 2, and 11.
1, 2, and 11. Okay. Any others? Seeing none. Council may adopt the reports collectively in a single motion. Does any member, sorry, I did that. Would somebody move adoption of the recommendations before council contains in the reports with the exceptions of A1, 2, 9, 11, and 14? Moved by Councillor Roberts. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously. The following reports are being adopted on consent. The first one is payment in lieu of parking application 640 West Pender Street. No, sorry. That's payment in lieu of parking application 1226 Homer Street. Closure of a portion of east side of Commercial Street south of Stainsbury Avenue. Award of tender PS 03047, supply and delivery of 6.5 cubic yards of front end loader. Form of development 189 National Avenue. Tender number 2004-01, construction of concrete curbs and gutters, asphalt concrete pavement on sundry streets. City's participation in Canada. Oh yes, that's right. And number 9. Number 10, 2003-2005 capital plan funding adjustments. Number 12, 2004 child care grants allocation 1 of 3. And number 13, auxiliary hours requested. Those are the ones. I'll accept a motion from a councillor to move adoption of bylaws.
So moved.
1 through 10. No? Oh, sorry. We're on to report reference. Let's back that up.
Excuse me, I have a question of the clerk. Councillor Cadman asked whether I can move a leave of absence for him for today's meeting for civic business
Its appropriate place would be under other business.
at the end, even
Yes.
though, all right, thank you.
We now have a report reference. Keep Vancouver Spectacular. And I think we're being presented by Mr. Kevin Van Vliet, solid waste manager, management engineer, and a representative from Tourism Vancouver.
Yes, good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members of council. On behalf of Engineering Services, I'm here to kick off this year's Keep Vancouver Spectacular campaign and provide a little bit of a program update. Keep Vancouver Spectacular is an annual neighborhood cleanup of public space throughout Vancouver, which teams the city, the Tourism Vancouver, and volunteers from residential neighborhoods as well as business areas. It began in 1996 as a partnership between the City of Vancouver, Tourism Vancouver, and the Ocean Blue Foundation, and this year is our 9th year of the program. The city's role, with the cooperation and the support of our program sponsors, is to help publicize the event, register and organize volunteers. We provide materials such as gloves, garbage bags, tongs, and vests, and we provide services such as garbage removal, large garbage bins when the demand meets them, and the graffiti removal van if and when requested. And we promote waste reduction at the kickoff and the large events and the wrap-up party. The community, on the other hand, helps organize the volunteers from residential neighborhoods or business areas. They actually volunteer in cleaning up the public realm, and they have fun and feel better about the city in doing so, and they must be having fun. We have about 5,000 volunteers every year in this program. Also, in conjunction with Keep Vancouver Spectacular, it's worth noting that for the month of May, Vancouver residents can dispose of their residential waste for free at the Vancouver landfill. This is helpful for people cleaning up, doing a little bit of spring cleaning. Free compost is also available at the landfill for the month of May, so for those of you who set out your yard trimmings every second week, you can go back and get some of that wonderful compost back. And we also conduct the Clean Up Your Act school play in April, which is set out for elementary school kids, and we're going to see a little bit more about that in a few minutes. To about 75 elementary schools every April, and these are done in conjunction with some school cleanups as part of KVS. We do get some sponsorship every year, which fluctuates a little bit. We have 2 media sponsors this year, the Vancouver Courier and City TV. We also have Tourism Vancouver and Vancouver AM as major sponsors. And we have a number of film companies, credit unions, and some waste management companies that provide either cash or services in kind. We've been working and will continue to work with Tourism Vancouver, business groups, and some residential groups to improve on on the KVS program, as well as to increase sponsorship and corporate support. We recognize that there's a lot more interest in this over the next few years as we approach 2010 in keeping our city spectacular. And as part of this, we've been working a lot more closely with Tourism Vancouver this year than we have sort of in the past, which has been very welcome. And I'd like to introduce Mr. Alan Clogg, General Manager of the Century Plaza Hotel, and a Tourism Vancouver board member who would like to say a few words about KVS.
Mr. Chair, councillors, ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure for me to be here this afternoon and representing Tourism Vancouver and the 1,000 members of our organization and the board of directors. I'm General Manager of the Century Plaza Hotel and Spa right downtown on Vancouver and Burrard Street, and we are pleased to be part of this important community program that started over 9 years ago, and we helped launch Keep Vancouver Spectacular in partnership with the city's engineering department. And it's no secret that the tourism industry has been suffering for the last few years due to these worldwide events which we had no control over. And we have some increased competition in our cruise ship market, and we're always trying to grow the market in Vancouver. Because of our strong partnerships, we remain a resilient destination with huge potential. It's partnerships like these developed through the Keep Vancouver Spectacular program that draw our community together and provide the foundation for greater things to come. As you know, Vancouver is positioned as spectacular by nature. This program endeavors to ensure the integrity of our positioning. The cleanliness of our streets and neighborhoods is something we cannot take for granted. It is our impressive reputation as a clean and safe destination that will keep visitors coming here and contributing significantly to the economy. So on behalf of the Board of Directors of our over 1,000 member businesses, thank you for your continued commitment to keeping Vancouver spectacular. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Clogg.
Engineering Services promotes waste reduction, water conservation, and anti-littering and anti-graffiti campaign to messages to children through the use of 3 school plays. Clean Up Your Act is the anti-litter, anti-graffiti play presented as part of the KVS campaign to about 75 schools each April. Vanessa Labourdet and Ian Gershwin from Dream Rider Theatre, who produced the play and present the play on our behalf, are going to present a 4 to 5 minute excerpt of the play. Basically this is the beginning of the play. It's a fun introduction. It provides a little bit of a warm-up. It uses very few words and allows the kids to get into it, understand what's happening, and it also allows for the ESL or the children with weaker English skills to get the message as well. So the only thing I would suggest is, because this play is directed at elementary school kids, maybe you put on your sort of grade 3 goggles and try and take that perspective when you watch the play and enjoy it. Thanks.
Thank you. That was great. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian and Vanessa. So, on behalf of Engineering Services, I'd like to extend an invitation to each of you and all of the people of Vancouver to get involved and help keep Vancouver spectacular by lending a hand or supporting the volunteers. Included in the package you've been given this afternoon is a KBS garbage bag, a pair of gloves, a brochure, and a poster to help spread the word. And I would now ask, Mr. Chair, that you would please read the proclamation declaring May to be Keep Vancouver Spectacular Month.
It would be my pleasure. Keep Vancouver Spectacular Month. Whereas the City of Vancouver believes in supporting the participation of residents to improve their neighborhood environment, and whereas tourism is the #1 industry in the Lower Mainland and our city's international reputation is Vancouver spectacular by nature, and whereas Keep Vancouver Spectacular will create a strong focus on cleanup and beautification activities, thereby raising the awareness of governments, business, and communities about the problem of littering and graffiti. And whereas Vancouver residents can join together with a sense of community, pride, to participate in activities to assist their neighborhoods through Keep Vancouver Spectacular. Now therefore, I, Larry Campbell, Mayor of the City of Vancouver, do hereby proclaim the month of May 2004 as Keep Vancouver Spectacular Month. So obviously the mayor's not here, and I'm not the mayor, but I'm sure he sends his regards from Australia. Councillor Roberts.
Can I ask a question of Mr. Van Cleef?
Yes.
Are you available for questions? Is it still possible for community groups to sign up for these different events, or is it closed, the schedule closed?
Oh, no, it's absolutely still possible, and it's possible right through until basically near the end of May.
So they would contact you, or who would they contact if someone wanted to get signed up and get some assistance with?
They would contact Brian Leonard, the Keep Vancouver Spectacular Coordinator, at 604-871-6544.
Okay, and now I notice on the list of the scheduled events to date that other than the downtown one, there are 8 communities signed up to do this, and all 8 are on the east side. And 2 of those are Dickens and Mountain View in my neighborhood, and as an east side resident, I'm going to challenge the west side to see if they can come up with 8 community groups who will sign up to do this. It seems that half the city isn't really getting out there and pitching in, and maybe the way it should. So I'm going to put out that challenge that who can have the most number of events.
That's great.
Sign up.
That's great, Councillor Roberts. I'm sure as the next speaker, Councillor Bass, speaking for the West Side, will take you up on that challenge.
Tim Lewis and I will speak for the West Side here. First of all, where do you get those hats? Second of all, do you give elocution lessons? It seems to be a council might be helped by elocution lessons. No, more seriously, do you know what the budget for this is? I was kind of curious about what our city budget is for this.
Yes, our city budget for this is on my last page. About almost $64,000.
Did you say 64?
$64,000, and that includes promotion. About 20,000 of that is for the play, as well as cleanups, disposal of bags, etc., that we don't get sponsorship for.
Seems to me to be a bargain, given the mobilization of the community. In the list here, it says a bunch of Saturdays. I presume all these begin at 8 o'clock, is it?
It really depends on the community group. It is volunteer driven, so,
Okay, so
they
it
pick the
depends
day,
on
they
the-
pick the time.
Okay.
And it
Well,
doesn't,
this is a great thing, and I guess we don't have to move receipt of this. I certainly think it's a good deal, and thanks for your work on this, and thanks for that great play, for that
Thank
little
you.
excerpt.
Thank you, Councillor Bass. We will now consider those reports held for debate, separate vote, etc. And I remind the councillors to take off their grade 3 hats now. The first report being held is A1. Councillor Bass.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just had a couple of questions about A1. A1 is the renewal of contract for corporate record storage and retrieval services. And on the second page, it said usage rates have grown since then due to expanded use of the services by departments. Is that roughly, we actually budgeted for last year 53,000 and we used 69,000. Is that roughly the proportional increase in the use of services, or do you have any more information on how much the services?
Yes,
use
it is.
increased?
There's 2 types of increases. Volumes of boxes that are identified in departments that are better stored in the off-site service. And we are, annually we destroy up to 1,000 boxes, and we transfer 1,000 boxes into the record center in addition to the new boxes we take in. And what we're finding is that our service levels are going up because we're storing and boxes that are retrieved more back to departments. When this program started, a lot of the records that were transferred to the program were in a sense a kind of dead storage. They were just waiting till their disposal dates ticked over. But now departments are using this program more effectively for semi-active storage of records they still require, but are more economically stored in this off-site center. So those are the two factors of cost increase.
Okay. Well, it sounds like the program's working in that regard. Then on page 3 it says contract performance is closely monitored and the city can remove its boxes if there's non-performance or non-compliance. Would you describe a little bit how that monitoring takes place, please?
Okay, we monitor first the inflow of records. So departments have to go through our control point before they can transfer records to the records center. And at that point, we ensure that the boxes are properly packed, that the department and corporate records management has a good box and file inventory of the box contents, so that what the record center, Iron Mountain, gets is a good product, something that they can easily manage and identify and return to the department when required, and then effectively dispose when the time of disposal comes. So we monitor the inflow. In terms of the actual contract monitoring, we closely supervise their delivery staff that come to City Hall. We have one of our own staff members greets them, checks the daily delivery records, ensures interfaces between the company and the offices that are receiving the records, and follows up with the clients in the departments to make sure they're getting the service they require.
They all go to the records storage from one point in City Hall, is that correct?
When they come to City Hall, they come to one point.
Okay.
And then they're distributed. But we do have other delivery points. We deliver to the police and to some of the outlying engineering sites, as well as the Parks Board.
And I would guess there's a real savings in space within the departments by having this service.
That's one of the primary benefits of this record program. We have 16,000 boxes in storage, and if these boxes were still in departments, they would be stuffed into office space, attics, basements, closets. That volume of records would fill this room about 10 times. So you can imagine the stress departments would be under to find space for those records. And some of them are required for legal and operational needs, so that these records do need to be retained, but they're best retained in this off-site program.
Thank you very much. I would move the recommendation, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Bass. All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously. Next we have Councillor Bass, A2.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This has to do with payment in lieu of parking at 640 West Pender. And I have a question here. My understanding is it says on the front we're decreasing the required parking from 11 to 8 spaces, but then it says a waiver of 8 parking spaces. So I'm not sure whether we're going from 11 to 3 or from 11 to 8.
Mr. Mayor and Council, just for clarification, we're going to a requirement of 8 parking spaces, so that what we're doing with this report is then waiving them because it's a heritage building and cannot provide the space on site. So we're taking payment for 8 parking spaces that we're waiving, but we have given them a 3-space relaxation from the requirement for this development to get down to the 8.
Oh, I see. So that basically we're getting payment in lieu for 8 spaces then.
That's correct.
And but this is conditional. This is conditional on SFU implementing an approved transportation management plan.
That's correct, yes.
I'm very excited about this in that I think it gives us an opportunity to use something almost akin to heritage to reduce the space requirements in projects that we're involved in. How generalizable is this?
This is consistent with what we do in heritage areas. This is a heritage building that we have at this particular location, and there is a significant relaxation because of the heritage that isn't really reflected in this report. So as an additional item, there is a heritage relaxation that's taking place here. In our general downtown, we have a base level requirement, and it really is there, but underlying it all is council policy to support transit, walking, bikes before the car. So really our requirement for the automobile is quite low in the downtown, and that's reflected in the numbers here, but we are giving it a further consideration just because of the nature of this particular development.
Can you describe some of what we're looking for in this transportation management plan?
Certainly. Very strong transit measures, and we're looking at an extension of the U-Pass program and an employee transit pass program as well for the SFU employees at this location. We are getting a provision of Class A bicycle spaces within this building, which includes the lockers and change and general facilities that go along with Class A bicycles. They're providing an additional 20 Class B bicycle spaces at their expense at this location as well. And they're looking at telecommuting, some other options for it. They're looking at a host of things, including class scheduling and how that might fit into reducing peak demands for this building. So there is excitement around what they might be doing because they are very much a responsible organization as far as making the building work well for the community.
I think it's very exciting, and I really want to applaud you on this. I want to move the motion, and then I'd like to ask a report, because I think this is generalizable. In other words, if a building or a project is sitting in a place where, by doing the things that you just mentioned, namely U-Pass, scheduling, telecommuting, making good use of transit, if they could reduce for that building their need for parking places, then maybe we could actually reduce the number required if they come up with an approved plan. So I wonder, before I move the motion, I'd be interested in your comments on whether that's something that you could look at, whether you could give us a report back on what we might need to consider in lowering the requirement for parking in a particular project.
Mr. McDonald?
Well, certainly we can look at how it works and in the context of the downtown. We will be looking at a review overall, not necessarily right this year, but certainly it's on our agenda to look at parking requirements and perhaps looking at reducing them overall. On the site-specific ones, we do that now through development reviews and have the ability to do that, but we can certainly give you information back on what's happening and what we might be able to do some further relaxation.
Great, thank you.
Councillor Bass, could I suggest that we do that under new business? Or
Well, the reason I like to do it now is that we have staff who I'd hate to keep sitting here for another whatever amount of time, and I thought I would raise it at this time. So I'd like to move the motion, and then staff seems to be willing to give us that information. If we could agree to that, then that's fine.
I don't see any opposition to that, so perhaps we could just formally move it under unfinished business or under new business?
Let me move A2.
Okay.
So let me move A and B under
A2, A and B is being moved by Councillor Bass. Any discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously.
And now may I ask for that report? So to report back on options for site-specific lowering given a transportation management plan at that site.
And Mr. McDonald, you're okay with that?
That's fine.
Yes.
We certainly can do that.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I think we'll need a seconder for that, don't we? No? Okay. All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously. A9, Councillor Roberts.
Yes, hi, this was regarding the child care portables and some of the arrangements for continuing child care and portables. The first question I had was that one of the spaces would be replaced with a new 69 space permanent structure, and I'm wondering if this expands the number of child care spaces in total and helps us achieve some of that objective of 5% increase over the next 2 years.
It does. There's a city-owned portable that houses 25 licensed spaces and a BC portable that houses 25 spaces. They're both on adjacent city lots, and so we would look at the feasibility of creating a permanent facility to increase the spaces by approximately 19 additional licensed spaces and family place and drop in the evenings and weekends.
That's great. That's good. Okay, and the second question, the provincial government, I congratulate them for the plan to replace the older portables, and if the groups want, they would give a capital grant instead of the replacement, so that's good. But then at the same time, they are no longer covering occupancy costs, and that's, what, approximately $15,000 per annum. So is this then a downloading onto these groups who are running the child care centers?
Well, these programs have never had to cover this additional cost. The province has indicated, however, that no other child care programs are subsidized for their occupancy cost, and what they're trying to do is create equity across all child care programs. I think the challenge for these programs is not having the opportunity to phase this in over time and looking at how they can generate this additional $15,000 a year to cover occupancy costs will provide some hardship for some of the programs.
Well, what will it mean? How will they raise $15,000?
Well, some of them have looked at going into contingency funds. So if they have a small contingency fund put aside for emergencies, they'll draw from that. Others are looking at other fundraising strategies. Some are looking at being administered by a larger organization who can help pick up their costs. They're all sort of looking at individual strategies.
Would that have any consequences for the city itself? Would some be in trouble and say, well, you know, come like this is an emergency? And
so I imagine that we'll see in the grant applications that some of the programs will be showing higher deficits because they're having to cover their occupancy costs and perhaps seeking higher grants from the city, grant allocation.
For many of, I guess there's a range given their size, what percent of their budgets would be that 15,000, how significant it would be to them?
They're all 25 space programs, so it is fairly consistent across the programs. Where the differences are is the majority of them are small standalone parent-run societies. One is run by the YMCA, so it has a larger administrative structure to absorb those costs, and one other is administered by a larger organization that also has a capacity to help offset some of the costs.
Could we play any role in asking the provincial government to phase that in? Would that be useful, or?
Certainly. I think staff have been dialoguing with the province and corresponding over the last year to try and transition this in a more gradual way so that the programs aren't experiencing as much hardship, but I think there's always room to ask.
Okay, well maybe I'll follow up on that. Thank you very much. I'll move that motion when you're ready, Mr. Mayor. Deputy
In
Mayor.
just a minute, I do have a couple questions regarding the Harborview Child Care Center. As I understand, there is a dispute in terms of whose jurisdiction that child care center falls under, and whether the province has come to the table yet on that issue. As I understand, we have some evidence that they were in fact historically the funders of that location.
Yeah, one of the portables is on parkland at 540 North Penticton, and it looks like a BC portable, and in the early 70s when the other programs were built, We do have documentation that would indicate that the development permit and other development applications and documentation identify the Department of Human Resources as the owner. However, the province hasn't paid the occupancy costs for this particular program, although they have done some structural repairs and maintenance on the portable through the BCBC program. We have been dialoguing over the last year with the province to try and point out that we think that it is owned by the province and therefore should have a portable replacement. To date, the position of the province has been that there isn't a lease between the city and or park with the program, although it is on park land. And regardless, because the province hasn't been paying occupancy costs, it isn't eligible for the portable replacement. So, you know, it's an argument that we've tried to suggest isn't necessarily logical. However, the nonprofit society is in dialogue with the province now, trying to push their case that they in fact are owned by the province and should be eligible for the portable regardless of whether or not they've paid occupancy costs for them.
And if unsuccessful, what's the outcome of this situation?
I can't predict that, but I would suspect then that this portable will just continue to be run by the society, and the ownership will have to be determined, or it will remain a mystery. I mean, they may just have to assume ownership.
But at 30 years of age, it's ending its useful life, I suspect. Yeah. And the province has not been paying the ongoing operational costs, but they have been paying the maintenance costs.
They have done some structural repair and replacement under the BCBC program, similar to what they've done in other portables.
So in the end, if it is a provincial portable and the nonprofit winds down, who's responsible for that portable? Because it's sitting on our park land. Who's going to remove that?
Yeah. Well, we're still trying to determine what the fallback position is if the province doesn't identify or take ownership, and if the nonprofit society doesn't assume ownership of the building, which it, by virtue of the fact that the province hasn't assumed ownership over this 30-year period, they essentially have, and they've done the maintenance and upkeep, and they've managed the building, so we would assume they would continue to do that. The challenge, I think, for the city and for the nonprofit society is they will be looking for increase, I would suspect, in capital dollars to do ongoing maintenance and repairs as the portable continues to age and deteriorate.
Are we continuing our dialogue with the province over this issue?
Absolutely, yeah.
Yes. Okay, thank you. Councillor Roberts, I'll take that motion.
Well, I'm going to move A, B, and C, and I'm going to also just add a D, move that council request the provincial government phase in the charge for occupancy costs over 3 years.
Okay. On the amendment.
Well, no, it's the original part of the original motion.
With the A, B, C, and D as amended, any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously. Next we have A11, Councillor Bass.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This concerns the Mount Pleasant Civic Center at 1 Kingsway authorization to tender. And I just was wondering, Mr. Chair, what provision there is for public involvement in the design, public input into the design of this community, this civic center.
Your worship, will have Melanie Martian, the project manager, would address that question. Thank you.
Well, we have 3 civic groups involved in this center, and each has a different dialogue with the public. The community center works hand in glove with their community center association board, and they have done a lot of polling of their membership and have a number of open meetings to develop the program, and throughout the preliminary and schematic design exercise. The library has a dialogue with their users through kind of general questionnaires as well. They've constituted an advisory group that has met several times on the library. And the child care commissioned a report in concert jointly funded by our social services and the Community Center Association on the needs and preferences of the Mount Pleasant area to develop their program. Since then, we've had several public meetings to bring forth the design as it's evolved. And we've taken in comments, and we continue to respond to the comments we received in the public arena.
And would you tell us how more public involvement will evolve over time as the design for this gets more developed?
Well, we've now applied for the development permit, so that tends to formalize the process at the macro level as far as the relationship to the public realm goes. And we're before the Urban Design Panel next week, and we'll be before the Development Permit Board in the first week of June. And so there is a fairly formal process where comments are being received by planning on this. And I believe they've received 2 letters and 6 emails that I've been apprised of since they've sent out their letters of notice. The community centers remain very public, and so do libraries, very responsive to the general population. And I think through their management and administration, their programming will continue to respond and reflect the needs of the community.
Okay. And will there be any input in relation to the housing?
The housing input is mostly market housing developed by our real estate department, and it's mostly through the development permit process that we receive comment. Also, I think the project at the steering committee and at the advisory committee levels gets down to the building committees put together by the child care, community center, library, as well as our real estate group do get together and jointly review the project. So it's a bit of a group think where people are trying to respond to each other's needs and comments.
Okay. And specifically, if we're going to go ahead with the authorization to tender, when would the next round of input take place, public input?
We are within the round of input because we are in the process, planning department is in the process of receiving comments from the community for the development permit application. In a parallel process, we continue to dialogue with the user groups of all the different facilities within the center. And there are citizens on these user groups.
And whoever gets the bid, will they be encouraged to have their own public process in terms of that community?
This is for tendering. This is just for the job of construction. So at that point, the design is pretty much set.
It's pretty set.
Yeah, and it's a matter of being a responsible neighbor within the community and how they effectuate the work. Noise, mess, traffic type of issues.
Okay. Councillor Bass, that's your 5 minutes.
Thank you. I would move
we have another speaker.
Recommendation when I know we have other councillors. I also noticed that we have visitors like we had 3 years ago.
Yes.
And hopefully we'll be able to work things out with fairness and respect.
And negotiate.
As they suggest. Thank you.
Councillor Sullivan.
Yes, Frances thought she had lots of conflicts in Afghanistan. Boy. Now, listen, this is a report that asks us to authorize the tendering for the construction of the Mount Pleasant Civic Center. That's, I guess, Kingsway and Main. And very exciting project. I've been following it for a number of years and supporting it. And I guess the history was the library, the Mount Pleasant Library and the Mount Pleasant Community Center, joining them together, adding in some child care, some market rental, and we've got one major, very significant community facility. What I'm concerned about is that here the report says there was no contemplation that the project would be required to pay citywide DCLs, and that construction costs have also increased significantly. And I know that this council did bring in DCLs against the staff recommendation that were quite a bit significantly above what was recommended. So I think the majority of council thought that maybe it would just be developers that would get caught in that, but it turns out that a number of civic facilities have been caught in this. I'm just wondering, it says there's about 18% increase. Are you aware of how much of that increase is actually caused by council through our DCLs, and how much is caused by the increase in construction costs?
Yeah, the DCLs cost roughly about $500,000, $450,000 to $500,000, a nominal amount compared to the actual escalation that we're experiencing right now in the construction industry.
Okay, so I know the developers did come to us earlier and give us some testimony about the increase in cost of construction, and I think there was some concern that maybe that wasn't accurate, but in fact you can confirm that the construction costs have risen that much.
It has. We've done an exhaustive estimate, both getting direct prices from contractors, from two estimators, and I think it's well published that some of the prices have rocketed up to much higher level than one would expect at this time.
So do you have a recommendation of where this extra money will come from?
I'll leave it to Ken Bainton.
Sorry, Your Worship, I didn't quite hear the question.
The extra construction cost, do you have a recommendation of where we're going to find that extra money?
Yes, Your Worship, in Report A10 on your agenda today, there were some recommended adjustments to the capital plan,
right,
which included adjustments to the funding that's available for this project. We're not going to know what the actual cost will be until we get through the tendering process, but we tried to provide a reasonable provision, adjusted provision within the capital plan for that. So that was covered off in your approval of Report A10.
Great. Okay, thank you.
The report's been moved by Councillor Bass. All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously. A14, Councillor Stevenson.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. This, of course, is a recommendation that the gathering place be allowed to have an extension of opening hours, and that the cost of this would be $82,000. I think that this is an excellent recommendation and that we should certainly go ahead with it. The gathering place is a social service that is very important in the West End. It has worked with many young people, youth on the streets in particular, and will continue to do so in the future. And I think it's really paramount that this extension of hours be permitted. However, I would like to make an amendment to this so that at the moment it states that the source of funds for 2004 is the contingency reserve. I would like to make an amendment that the contingency reserve be repaid by slot money as it begins to come in later in the fall. The same as we did with the grants 2 weeks ago, which also were an excellent use of this money that obviously has been a great deal of discussion. So I'm moving this amendment in order that the contingency reserve might be repaid and then later used, obviously, for other issues that arise. So I would move that amendment.
So it would read that, so I'm assuming you're injecting after the source of funds for 2004 is the contingency reserve, and that it be repaid by slot money. Is that correct?
That's correct.
On the amendment, next we have Councillor Sullivan on the amendment.
I don't believe there's an amendment. I believe there's a motion.
Oh, on the motion, yes, you're correct. As moved.
Okay. Is there someone from the gathering place here? The report is quite graphic, actually, and seniors are hassled entering and exiting from the New Continental. They are threatened and subject to campers begging for money, trying to take over their lobby. Recently, the windows were shot out of the New Continental suites. Residents of Helmken House evicted from their suite by men who visited and took over for the weekend. The alley between Gathering Place and Helmken House has become a place to deal drugs and to smoke crack. Crystal meth has become the drug of choice, on and on and on. It sounds very, very much of a difficult situation. Now, this is basically opening this for another one more day, Sunday. Is there some hope then that the opening this for a longer period would actually help with that situation?
There is, and that is the purpose behind the report. Perhaps I could let the acting director, Mr. Greenall, speak to this.
I guess, I mean, from two perspectives. I mean, one, talking to client, patrons of the center, is partly it has to do with the street presence and as who is operating the corner. And with us being closed from the end of Saturday until the beginning of Monday morning, we as the center of the city facility aren't occupying that corner. So that's important, just from in terms of the street scene, and then from an operational perspective, there is an alternative, and there is just the day-to-day monitoring of the situation that we do, because what we do is assist the New Continental staff and Helmken House with our security attendance, because there's a lower staffing level at the New Continental now than there has been in previous years.
Okay. Well, I want to speak to the issue of the slots. Now, I have a motion coming up a little later in which I try to get this council to...
Councillor Sullivan, on the motion before you, not the motion.
Slots. The idea is that they're going to be this money's coming
Yes,
from slots.
not on your motion that's
Right.
coming, but the motion that's before you.
Yes, I am very opposed to using slot money when we don't even know if it's going to be coming. I protested that this council would not allocate revenue from slots to the budget just last month. And the reason given to me was we're not sure if it's actually going to come. Now, it seems irresponsible to allocate slot machine money to a project when we don't even know if the money is coming and how much will come. And I believe that we do need a process, and we need some policies around slot machine money. It just seems like it's open season that we're willing to fund anything because the slot money is coming around the corner. I am opposed to that, and actually I will move an amendment to remove that line from this motion.
Just before you do, Councillor Sullivan, perhaps we should go through the process of asking staff all the questions that you want to ask, and then we'll enter debate and have the amendments that we want to be moved at that point in time. But if there are any further questions of staff, then that's what I'll entertain at this point in time. Seeing none, then I will clear the board. And Councillor Ladner, you have a question of staff?
I noticed in the report here that there's a reference to the two other youth serving services that really got the initial commission as previous services.
That's right, there you go.
At the corner of Seymour and Helmken. And when I've been down there talking to people about what's going on, the observation has been made that congregating all these services in one place compounds the problems. Have we made any efforts to talk to those people about relocating as a measure, as a means of dealing with these problems that we're proposing to deal with by hiring extra staff?
Family Services of Greater Vancouver operates runs the program for street use services, and they're just in the process of getting approval to build on Burrard, just near the corner of Burrard and Davie. So they will be moving in the next year or so.
And what about the Union Gospel Mission place there in the corner?
There's no. They're there for now, and I think there's been a lot fewer issues with the Union Gospel Mission location. But I mean, I don't. I can't really speak to their issue because that's a different city department.
Perhaps I could add to that, Your Worship. Even with the relocation of Dusk to Dawn, I think that the gathering place does serve to, in a sense, ensure that that corner is a safe place. Our continued presence there does make a difference, and has, before Dusk to Dawn was established there, which it was only a couple of years ago. This has been an ongoing, if you like, situation in the neighborhood that is becoming more serious over the last couple of years because of the advent of increased homeless youth and the crystal meth situation. So even though the Dusk to Dawn service will be relocating over the next year or so, and we hope we've found a new location for that that's more appropriate, I think we still need to have the presence on the corner.
I noticed there's a mention here about the parking garage. When I was there, the parking garage gate was left open, and all kinds of stuff was going on in the parking garage other than parking. And I've been by a few times since then, and I've never seen that gate closed. And is that something that could be done, or is going to be done as part of this security?
Yeah, my understanding is there's been an ongoing liaison between staff and several of the other agencies in the area with the parking garage operators, and there is a gate that has been installed recently. That is, though, one of the ongoing situations that we're part of monitoring in the area. Perhaps Mr. Greenwell can give you more detail.
In the last 2 months, or just over 2 months, they have installed a new gate, and so the parking lot is much more secure after 8 when they close it down than it has been in the past. So that has improved a lot. The number of break-ins in the parking lot is down, and there's not the same sort of transient population there that has been in the past.
That's good to hear. When I was down talking at the public presentation about the new Dusk to Dawn Center, one of the features that was considered to be very important was not having alcoves and covered spaces where people could sleep and hang out and congregate in a public way and bother people such as the inhabitants of the New Continental. Have you given any thought to following the lead of the Carnegie Center and adjusting the outside design and street architecture such that you can minimize the problems of people loitering in the corners and bothering other residents in the neighborhood?
I think that happens less on our side of the building than it does on the Seymour Street side, which we don't manage. But I think part of the problem is, like, it's a historical. We were renovated into the space that we are. We weren't purpose built as a community center, so we're dealing with some oddities in the architecture historically that, you know, if we had been purpose built, probably we wouldn't be dealing with. But I know the New Continental, they've been talking about doing some sort of a gate or fence or something around the front of their building, because they have a very large sort of alcove area there where there's been a lot of people sleeping, and so they are talking about doing some sort of fence in the front of their building.
That's good to hear. Thank you.
A lot of it has to do with fire exits, and there's little alcoves because you have to have them there so that the door doesn't swing straight out into the street. So.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Ladner. Councillor Woodsworth.
thank you very much for the work you do, and I'd like to commend you and your staff for all the emergencies you deal with and all the really basic human needs you address. And, I am concerned, though, that if the hours are expanded to Sunday, what will the impact be on the New Continental and how they feel about you expanding these hours?
Oh, I think they're quite pleased with it. Because we do provide backup support, and our staff will go to the front of the New Continental fairly regularly and assist with the staff there, because, as I said, they've had reduced staffing levels over the last number of years.
So you have consulted with them about this?
Yeah.
Okay. And having the hours from 10 a.m. to 8 a.m., is that, why did you make a decision 10 till 8?
Consistency, because those are our hours from Monday to Saturday.
Okay. So there is a possibility that seniors can go out earlier and they won't be dealing with the influx of people into the gathering place, or is that not factor into the equation?
I don't quite understand your question.
Well, I'm assuming you have more business when you're open than when you're closed. Maybe not.
I think there is somewhere for people to go when we're open, and that is going to reduce the number of people that are in front of the New Continental. And then also, with our staff being able to assist the New Continental staff, we'll be more able to, assist them in moving people along if they are congregating and residents of the New Continental are feeling threatened. And the other benefit with the New Continental is our kitchen will be operating on Sundays, so that the New Continental residents will be able to access the cafeteria on the 3rd floor, which we operate.
Great. Okay, I'll let the other point go. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Bass.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A question to staff. If this comes out of contingency reserve, does that mean that this money really becomes part of our budget for the following year? Becomes a service that is part of city services for next year?
It does then become part of our operating budget next year, that's correct. If council, at the end of, I think we said we'll report back in 2005, and if council is still happy with having the center open for those hours, it would go into the operating budget, that's correct.
If the money is replaced with slot money, does that affect that kind of semi-commitment that we make?
The way I understand the motion, it would change the funds available in the contingency reserve for this year, but it would not, as far as I know, unless council made a decision, and I would defer to the city manager on the process for that, affect the operating budget directly. It would affect the amount that we take from the contingency reserve.
Right. Thank you very much. I would be very interested in hearing what Councillor Sullivan's motion is.
We will hear it in due course as we have Councillor Lewis and Roberts.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
I'll be very brief. I can only repeat what Councillor Bass said, which is that I'm very interested to hear Councillor Sullivan's amendment, and that's the only reason I put my light on.
Thank you. Councillor Roberts.
Yes, I had a question regarding the recent closure of 2 safe houses that housed young children, young teens. And I'm wondering what the impact of that is on the gathering place. What do you do when you close down at 8 o'clock? Where do people go now? Are you putting people on the street, or what is happening?
Well, we refer people as best we can to either, treatment, shelters, or we have an extremely good staff who are very well connected with shelters throughout the city, and with what's available as far as treatment facilities in the city goes. So I think the referrals that people do are excellent, and and then at 8 o'clock, Dusk to Dawn open at 8 o'clock. So certainly there's a number of youth, if they're under 21, who would leave our building and go to Dusk to Dawn, which is open from 8 at night until 6 in the morning.
But did you used to refer people to these safe
Yes.
houses? Was that, and so now you have fewer beds, fewer places?
Yes.
Fewer. And particularly, I guess what I'm concerned about are the younger teens, because now are you having to refer them where there's really adults, where there's really much older teens? Are you referring them to places now where they're much more
Well,
in the same facility? And
at Dusk to Dawn, they've adjusted their hours. Previously, they've lowered the age to of who is allowed into the center down to 21. So there's less of that. Because when they first opened a number of years ago, that was an issue for them. So they've changed how they operate. And so, I mean, that's one referral that we have. Another referral would be Covenant House.
mm-hmm. So are you, I mean, this is maybe too soon to really get a sense of what this is going to mean for you and your operations. I mean, they've just been closed down,
Yes,
haven't
yeah.
they, as they brought it. Thank you very much. And thank you for the work.
Councillor Sullivan, I believe you have an amendment.
Yes, basically my amendment is to make the motion exactly as the staff put it to us and recommended. And the reason is we're taking it out of contingency reserve, which is appropriate, but that future years funding is to be added to the community service operating budget without offset. So it is definitely on the base budget. And I support that. I think I was part of a government a number of years ago that set the gathering place up, and there was a lot of concern about the displacement as there was the growing new condos that were moving into downtown South, and there was going to be some social difficulties that were going to be encountered, and that it was always assumed that the hours would extend as we moved along. And I think this is simply following the direction that we originally set. My great concern is only about adding slot machine money into this, and I think it's irresponsible. I will be speaking to that on my next motion. I will simply leave it like that and hope that people will stay with the staff recommendation.
Thank you. Mr. Clerk, you have some comments?
Yes, just to clarify, Councillor, so you're striking and be repaid by slot money. That's your amendment, to strike those words. That will do that.
Thank you. Councillor Lewis?
Well, I'll be
On the
very, very
amendment?
brief. I would speak in favor of the amendment. I would support what the staff had originally proposed, what the staff had originally recommended, and I would not support the additional wording. So I support the amendment which removes the additional wording, and if the amendment carried, puts the motion back to what staff were originally recommending.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Green? Yes. Councillor Stevenson? Don't touch. Wait. There you go.
I just want to know if this is in order, in as much as if Councillor Sullivan is opposed to it, he just votes it down when the vote comes to the amendment.
Mr. Clerk?
Why would you make an amendment to an amendment?
No, no,
Well, it's
you,
not an amendment. You
Councillor
moved the
Stephen.
whole motion, including those words at the beginning, so it is an amendment to strike those. It's not an amendment to an amendment.
thank you. Councillor Green? Councillor Green?
Thank you. You know, I'm going to support the original motion as put forward by Councillor Stevenson. And the reason for that is that we really have some major issues that we're dealing with, and slots was a difficult decision for all of us. I don't play slot machines or anything. But the revenue does have some things that we can do with it. And you remember in the last council meeting, we voted to fund some community festivals made up of various ethnic communities in our city, and I'm very proud that we're able to do that. And also that we're able to help quite a few women's groups that we may not be able to help. And what we did is we passed two motions that said we'd replenish the contingency with slots money. And if we're going to have slots, that's what I want to do with it. I want to use it for these purposes. And what I find very difficult to deal with here is the fact that Councillor Ladner, and I believe seconded by Councillor Sullivan, asked to put slot money into the budget to lower property taxes, not to deal with the issues of our diversity that we want to support in the city, or at least some of us do, are the difficulties that many of the women's groups are having. Many of us think that that's more worthwhile than paying down property tax. Secondly, to have some kind of, I guess, semi-principled position against slots and going against the recommendations that came out in our reports from staff that told us that in many cases studies show that bingo is much more addictive than slots. And yet Councillor Sullivan receives a lot of funds from bingo through his charities. I might note that those bingos that as far as I know, are all located in municipalities surrounding Vancouver and not within Vancouver. So I kind of question why he's taking such a strong position on this and not taking a position against profits from gambling that come from other municipalities. So I'm going to support this, and hopefully we can do it, and we can continue to support the needs of our citizens in any way that we can.
Thank you, Councillor Green. Councillor Sullivan.
Well, the discussion has taken a distinct turn to my role in helping charities that actually receive bingo. So I guess I feel obliged to defend myself here when I was trying to deal with the issue. I have always said I am in favor of gambling in society. Legal, managed, disciplined, restricted gambling. What I am opposed to, and I'm very in favor of non-profit groups receiving money from that gambling activity. What I am very concerned about is the lack of discipline, the lack of restraint that this government, as in collusion with the BC government, a very curious alliance, to result in a situation where the government is not only the regulator, but is also the beneficiary. And that is a blatant conflict of interest, and we have seen it right here in this council, where most of the people here would not want to vote for slot machines because it is called the crack cocaine of gambling. Bingo, the average person who goes to bingo can spend $20. I think it's $22. That's managed, restricted. When they go to play slots, they can be out hundreds of dollars. So a person who has an addiction to gambling, I would far rather them go to something more managed and restricted where there's a little bit of socialization that happens. So that is my brief defense of the relationships of charities with bingo. What I did want to deal with is that the motion, if I had to vote against the motion that Councillor Stevenson brought up, that would mean I would be opposing this whole initiative. And in fact, I was part of a government that dreamed this up, that supported it, that got it going, and I do want to be able to support it and see it move into what its full vision was supposed to be. So that's why I would like to have that amendment maintained. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Ladner.
I'm going to vote in favor of the recommendation as originally laid out, for the reason that I had mentioned at the last meeting that I don't think we should be just deciding off the cuff where we're spending money that we don't already have. And Councillor Green refers to my recommendation of what we should do with the slot money. That is the only debate, to the extent that that was a debate, that we've ever had about what we do, what our policy is about slot money. And we are implicitly creating a policy here. If suddenly everything that comes, some new thing comes along, we like it, throw it in the slot pile. If that's the policy, throw everything in the slot pile that we kind of like the look of, then let's have that out and let's clear that up, lay it out so everybody can understand it. But to just start doing this ad hoc stuff, I am not in favor of, and I think that we should not put anything more in the slot pile until we decide what our policy is. And once we've agreed on that policy, all of us, not just the Cope Caucus, if they can agree on it, in fact, then I would be I would be totally opposed to allocating money from the slots for anything.
Thank you, Councillor Ladner, I think. Councillor Lewis.
Now, Councillor Ladner, repeat after me. Unity through diversity. Unity through diversity. There is no need for arbitrary unity. The fact of the matter is that I've got good news. And the good news is that contingency reserve has more than enough money in it. The good news is, and you'll all recall, only a few weeks ago, we approved the additional shifting of $1 million, funding might be a better word, of $1 million, above and beyond the staff recommendation into contingency reserve. So the good news is we don't need to supplement contingency reserve with revenue from slots. So I'm speaking in favor of the amendment, but I'm certainly not concerned about there being differences of opinion on the matter, unity through diversity. The only other brief comment I'd make is this, on the comment that somehow or other bingo and slot machines are the same. In fact, they're not. Slot machines are the crack cocaine of gambling. To the best of my knowledge, people don't lose their life savings playing bingo. Families are not destroyed playing bingo. They are lost playing slot machines. So I'm supporting the amendment, but I don't think that the fact that there's a bit of diversity around council is a bad thing. It's a good thing, and I'm glad that we have a very energetic and diverse council.
Thank you, Councillor Lewis. Councillor Stevenson.
Well, Councillor Ladner says that we're implicitly creating policy if we were to vote for this slot money to go to pay back contingency reserve. In fact, we already have begun to create policy. We did that 2 weeks ago. So this isn't, we're already pregnant. I don't know, what the big deal is now for anybody. 2 weeks ago, we all agreed that this group and that group and the other group should all get money, and that money should come out of slots. So for all of a sudden to back up now and say, oh, no, we haven't created any policy, of course we have. That's naive to suggest we haven't. I think, as Councillor Green said, that we can pick and choose groups that we think are groups that we want to make sure are funded, and that we can return the money to contingency reserve so that there will be, in fact, more money for other projects. And we don't know what's along the road as far as spending is concerned, but we do know that there's a possibility of a fair amount of slot money coming. Now, this is saying that we pay it back. If there is no slot money, obviously it won't be paid back. So I think that this is a prudent way to go at this particular time. It means that we have extra money. It means that the money is going where most of us would like to see it go. And it does mean that indeed we have begun to create a policy. And we all voted in favor of it, except for, of course, the two MPAs, people who did not vote in favor. But the rest of us were very clear that we wanted that money to come from slots and to go into the organization. So this is absolutely no different than that.
Thank you, Councillor Stevenson. Seeing no other speakers, on the amendment. All in favor of the amendment? Opposed? Councillor Green and Stevenson and Louis opposed. On the motion as amended, all in favor? Carries unanimously. That are all. The amendment passed. Now we have a report to council. Where are we? We have a seniors report coming before council. 2003 annual report of Special Advisory Committee on Seniors for our consideration. I note that the city manager recommends the committee be thanked and that council receive the report for information. Do we have a motion to receive?
Motion to receive the Seniors Committee report with thanks to all the volunteers who worked with the seniors over the past year on this report.
Thank you, Councillor Woodsworth. All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously. Motion to rise from the committee of whole. Moved by Councillor Bass. Adopt the report of the committee of whole. Motion moved by Councillor Bass. Seconded by Councillor Woodsworth. We have bylaws 1 through 10 for consideration by council. Council may adopt the bylaws collectively in a single motion. Does any member wish to hold any of the bylaws for debate, separate vote, or because of conflict of interest? Seeing none. I will accept a motion from a councillor to adopt, moving adoption of bylaws 1 through 10. Councillor Lewis has moved that adoption. All in favor? Seconder for that, Councillor Roberts. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously. Bylaw 1 is to amend the parking bylaws number 6059, re-MC-1 and MC-2 district schedules. Bylaw number 2 is to amend building bylaw number 8057 regarding upgrades to existing buildings. Bylaw number 3 is to amend zoning and development bylaw number 3575, re-mini storage and warehouse. Bylaw number 4 is to amend parking bylaw number 6059. Bylaw number 5 is to amend the zoning and development bylaw number 3575 regarding secondary suites. Bylaw number 6 is to amend license bylaw number 4450 regarding secondary suites. Bylaw number 7 is to amend subdivision bylaw number 5208 regarding secondary suites. Bylaw number 8 is bylaw to amend parking bylaw number 6059 regarding secondary suites. Bylaw number 10 is a bylaw to amend bylaw number 4296, which amends the zoning and development bylaw number 3575 by rezoning an area to CD1. Bylaw number 10 is a bylaw to amend noise control bylaw number 6555 regarding 1966 East 19th Avenue. We have one notice. We have two notices on motion. Councillor Woodworth, would you like to introduce your motion? Oh, wait. We have administrative motion A1. Where are we? Administrative motion 1 asks council to approve closing of a portion of the east side of Commercial Street south of Stainsbury Avenue and has been moved by myself and seconded by Councillor Green. Administrative motion number 2 asks council's approval for the form of development for 1966 East 19th Avenue, and administrative motion number 3 asks council to adopt the mini storage warehouse guidelines. And motions 2 and 3 have been moved by Councillor Green and seconded by Councillor Cadman. Councillor Cadman is absent, so we'll require another seconder. Councillor Lewis has seconded them. We'll consider all of them together if that's appropriate. All in favor of administrative motions 1, 2, 3? Opposed? Carried unanimously. We have motion on notice number 1. Councillor Woodworth, could you introduce your motion, and could we have somebody second that, if appropriate? Councillor Woodworth.
My motion on notice is 2004 Move for Health, Active Children and Youth, if I may read this out. Whereas the World Health Organization has selected Move for Health Day, Active Children and Youth to be observed around the globe on May 10th, 2004, and whereas physical activity affects the lives of all people in Canada and around the world, and whereas compelling scientific evidence has demonstrated that physical activity plays a key role in promoting optimal health and development in children and youth, and in preventing disease, disability, and premature death in everyone, and whereas 2/3 of Canadians are not active enough to benefit their health, and whereas there are virtually no human condition that cannot be improved by increasing physical activity, and whereas physical activity builds and maintains a healthy body and promotes well-being and decreases feelings of anxiety and depression, and whereas Canada's Physical Activity Guide recommends that everyone accumulate 30 to 60 minutes of moderate physical activity most or preferably all days of the week, and whereas World Health Day provides an opportunity to focus local, national,
and international attention on the necessity and benefits of physical activity, and whereas federal and provincial territorial governments have recognized that physical inactivity is a major health concern in Canada, and that individual, community, national, and global collaboration is essential to educating and raising awareness of physical activity, hence promoting 2004 Move for Health Day, Active Children and Youth in Canada. Therefore, be it resolved, the Council of Vancouver declares that Vancouver will observe Move for Health Day, Activity Children and Youth on May the 10th, 2004. Council urges all citizens to take part in activities and observances designed to increase awareness and understanding of the importance of physical activities, and to join local, national, and global efforts to improve accessibility to physical activities for all our citizens.
Could we have a seconder? Second by Councillor Bass. Discussion? No discussion? Question? All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously. Motion on notice B2. Councillor Sullivan.
Yes, this motion comes as a result of something I witnessed at a committee meeting about just before...
Could you introduce your motion and have it moved, and then we'll...
Okay, I move this motion.
Could you introduce your motion by...
You actually want me to read the whole thing out?
Well, read it, you're there, at least you're there for him, and introduce your motion.
Therefore be it resolved that no additional expenditures be made in anticipation of slot machine revenue until we are certain we receive it, and no more slot machine revenue be spent without proper policy and procedure approved by council.
Do we have a seconder to that motion? Seconded by Councillor Ladner. Councillor Sullivan.
Okay. Now this motion comes about as a result of a committee meeting that I attended just before the Easter break, in which we dealt with reconsideration of nonprofit grants. Now, in my 10 years, reconsideration of grants are usually sleepy affairs. 2 to 3 groups show up asking for reconsideration. I was very surprised when no less than 25 groups showed up with all of their people with them, and we had to actually move the meeting into the council chambers. Now, what I witnessed at that meeting was something that I've never seen in all my time on council. About $187,000 in grants were there for reconsideration. Not only did we have a staff professional evaluation of all these grants, but we also had 5 volunteer citizens, for at least some of them, come and volunteer significant amount of time. These are highly regarded citizens. Now, $100,000 of that, approximately, the staff said, if you have the money, fund it. But we don't have the budget for it, so don't fund it. Now, $87,000 of that, the staff said, and citizens, even if you had the money, we recommend you don't fund it. So what happened was very shocking to me, to great cheers, every single grant. Everybody that applied for money got it. Now, even the grants which the staff suggested should not be funded were given money. The source of revenue, there was an amendment that this would be explicitly seen to be slot machine money. And now there are a number of community service groups that do have some moral issues around receiving slot money, and now they were asked if they want this critical funding, they would have to be complicit in the decision. Now, what I found strange was just last month, this council had refused to put revenue from slot machines into our budget projections. And I felt, the reason given to me was we're not sure we're actually going to get it. And yet a month later, we are spending this money against the staff's recommendations. So there were a lot of accusations about me. In fact, it was very uncomfortable. Now, I have no trouble giving money to the organizations. In fact, the celebration grants, I was part of the group that actually invented that concept. So I'm certain in favor of celebration grants. What I am very much opposed to is the undermining of the professional decisions of our staff and the volunteer citizens. It does seem to me that some councillors, a majority of councillors, see slot machine money as fantasy money. It's not real money. It doesn't need policy. It doesn't need procedure. In fact, Councillor Stevenson just said council should pick and choose. That's the policy of how to deal with slot machine money. That is not adequate. This money belongs to all the citizens and should be spent with proper policy and procedure. I want to commend to you that if we can pass these two motions, we will no longer spend money we don't know we have. Let's spend it when we get it in the bank, and also we'll take the time and develop proper policy and procedure and not undermine the staff professional recommendations. I believe that we're putting our staff in a very difficult position. Now that nonprofit groups here, we're giving out money to anybody who asks, I think we're bound to get real difficulties, and our staff is likely to find their professionalism undermined. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I'm going to be voting against this motion, primarily because we do have a report coming back from staff. We've asked for a report already for staff to come back regarding procedures. So this motion really isn't necessary. It's redundant. And I think it's proper for us to wait for that report to come back so that we can look at their recommendations on policy and then move forward from there. So I'll be voting against this. It's simply not necessary at this time.
Thank you. Councillor Ladner?
Well, I wish I could believe Councillor Stevenson that this is not necessary, but we just demonstrated a few minutes ago that it is necessary because we're spending this money without the policy and procedures having been decided on. And as I said then, and I'll say it again, that is not a responsible way to manage other people's money. It's fiscally imprudent, it's irresponsible, and it's non-democratic that there's no public airing of these issues. I may remind this council that our itinerant mayor at one point announced with no consultation or policy agreement of any kind that we would be having 200 more police officers in the city. And is that coming out of the slot machine revenue too? Is that what everybody's thinking? Let's get it out in the open. Let's lay it out. Let's find out, and everybody knows, and then we can all live or die by our decisions and
Councillor
make
Sullivan,
more rational.
could you clarify who said there's going to be 200 more police officers?
Mr. Larry Campbell, I think his name is, the mayor, who spoke at a public meeting and spoke to the media saying that he would look after the provision of another 200 police officers in the city. It's widely reported, and I never heard it disputed, so I assume it's true that he said that. However, there was never a decision of this council to do that. Similarly, there's never been a decision of this council as to how we spend the slot money other than just, oh, here's a friend or here's a great idea, let's just throw some over this way or that way. So we've got to do better than that, and anything I can do to make this council a little more responsible and rational about how we spend millions of dollars of other people's money, I'm all for it, and I will strongly support this motion.
Councillor Stevenson.
Well, I don't think the Councillor Ladner heard me quite clearly. We have asked staff, and you, in fact, voted in favor of asking staff to come back with a report with policy, and that's coming. So this is just simply not necessary. We'll get the report and we can carry on from there. And it'll be a staff report that I'm sure that you'll be able to decide whether or not you like, or whether you like the recommendations, or whether you'd like to go in a different direction, whether you'd like it to go towards paying down your taxes for your home, or whether you think it should go to the police. But we need to wait for that report.
Thank you, Councillor Stevenson. I guess I'll wade in here. What I'm hearing is that we're looking for some on council is looking for proper policy versus the right to pick and choose as council sees fit. And it's not that simple in my mind that it's proper policy versus picking and choosing. It has to be a combination of the two, and therefore I see the benefits of both sides of the argument. I would prefer that there be a proper policy and that we try as best we can to adhere to that policy, but when a situation arises that requires action, we should take that action regardless of the policy that's in place. And I think that's the will of council when we make that choice of whether or not to pick and choose, given the certain situation. Now, in terms of where the money comes from, whether it's slot money or contingency reserve. That is still a choice of council, where they finally decide where that money comes from. And there is really very little difference between the two in this instance here, because we are saying in A14 was to replace the money after, if in fact slot money comes available. Now, I have the benefit of not being there for when all those reconsiderations took place, to look at it from the outside. Some of them I would have voted for, some of them I probably would not have voted for, but in the end it was council's will to reconsider. And I need to remind both Councillor Ladner and Sullivan that at last year's reconsideration, both of you extended the amount of funding available to the groups that asked for reconsideration. Both of you did. And where did that money come from? It came out of contingency reserve. Absent policy, staff had recommended against giving some of those groups funds. But both of you, because it was presented as an either-or, Councillor Sullivan, in fact, it was you that moved the motion to move all the twos, all the ors, which gave the funding to all those groups. And that was outside of policy. So it's convenient to say that it's nice to have proper policy and not pick and choose, but when in fact last year you did exactly what you're speaking against today. Councillor Ladner.
Well, I'd just like to make a distinction between contingency reserve and slot money. The contingency reserve is there precisely as you described, Your Honor, Deputy Worship, that it's there for things that come along that we're not prepared for, that there is perhaps no policy for. The slot money is a much larger pot of money, and it's going to get even bigger potentially, and I think therefore needs some focus and some attention. Every other municipality that's had a large amount of slot money has had some kind of discussion and decision about whether it's used for operating or capital or social services or whatever. And I know we already get some slot money that we've decided in the past that goes into general revenue. So if we're going to change that policy, let's change it out in the open. So this motion speaks to slot money, not to the contingency reserve and how we spend that. And I think the slot money deserves special attention because it's a special kind of money.
Councillor Sullivan?
I disagree with your memory of that event. This year, we had $187,000 for reconsideration. The staff said if we had more money, you should give it to them because these are really good groups. It's not the right process, but I'm not making a big issue about that. They were good groups. They should get the money. What I have never done is voted for a group, or there were a number of groups, for $87,000 that staff said, even if you had the money, we recommend you don't give it to them. For sure, I have never voted to give public money to groups that staff said are not deserving of it. Thank you.
Councillor Stevenson.
Well, I think that Councillor Sullivan is totally off the subject. The subject is his motion. And the fact of the matter is, for the third time, Councillor Ladner, there is a report coming back from staff. When that report comes back, we'll have a full and open discussion about policy and where slot money goes. So this report, this motion by Councillor Ladner is completely unnecessary at this time.
Councillor Sullivan.
Yes, I'll end my comments with this then. If it is redundant, and if it is anticipated that it's not necessary to have these motions, then Councillor Stevenson, you should be able to vote for them because it won't affect your behavior. So why not just vote for them, give a good signal to the community and the public that you care about spending their money properly, that you want proper procedure, proper policy, and that you don't endorse picking and choosing based on political decisions. Thank you.
Councillor Roberts.
Question.
The question has been called. I'll test the House on whether or not the question should be called. All in favor of calling the question? Aye. Opposed? The question, there is Councillor Bass and Councillor Sullivan opposed to call, and Councillor Ladner. And Councillor Louis opposed to calling the question, but it passes. All in favor of the motion? Stevenson, Green, and Louis opposed. We have, I believe, one notice of motion, and there is a speaker to that on that motion, and I would again suggest that it be moved to the May 4th meeting, as where our agenda items are heavy on this coming Thursday.
I understand then it's accepted as introduced and referred to May.
Oh yes, could we? Well, let's let Councillor Woodsworth introduce the motion, and then we'll get a seconder, and then...
The notice of motion reads, whereas City of Vancouver resident Frank Paul died in 1998 under circumstances that raise concerns about some Vancouver Police Department policies, procedures, and actions, and whereas BC Police Complaints Commissioner Dirk Reinvelt has asked BC Solicitor General Rich Coleman to hold a public inquiry on the death of Mr. Paul, and whereas BC First Nations Summit Chief Edward John has also called for a public inquiry, and whereas Solicitor General Coleman has yet to call a public inquiry, therefore it be it resolved that Vancouver City Council asks Solicitor General Coleman to hold a public inquiry on the circumstances of the death of Mr. Frank Paul. I understand a number of people have asked to speak, but this will be moved over to committee meeting of May the 5th.
May the 4th.
May the 4th.
And the second, could we have a seconder to that? Seconded by Councillor Lewis. Thank you, Councillor Woodsworth. Those are all the notices of motion. New business? New business. Councillor Bass. Councillor Stevenson, did you have some new business?
As we all know, the council has been wrestling with late night liquor hours for some time, and a report has come back from the chief license inspector stating that 21 establishments are open up to 4 a.m. on Fridays and Saturdays, and 18 up to 3 a.m. on Fridays and Saturdays. And we have found as a result of this that there has been some problems in the downtown area, and I think we're all aware of that. There seems to be a lot of young people pouring in from the suburbs. And the liquor operators have been very good in trying to control the situation, trying to make sure that the problems don't get out of hand. But nevertheless, there have been some problems, and we're in discussion with Bar Watch and as to how we might solve some of those problems. And they decided on their own to roll back their hours from 4 a.m. to 3 a.m. However, that hasn't been well received by all of the establishments, and so that's caused a problem with the ones that have in fact rolled back. So I would like to ask city staff if we might have a memo as to whether, what the effects might be if we rolled this back from 4 a.m. to 3 a.m. With all of the bars, and whether that might solve, or whether they feel that that might solve a majority of the problems, whether it's that one extra hour that in fact may be the problem, because young people come in feeling they've got 2 hours when the bar closes wherever in Surrey or wherever else they're coming from. So if I could ask just for a memo to come back on what the staff's opinion as to whether or not that might be the route to go, to drop back to 3 o'clock, and then we could proceed from there, and we'll continue our discussions in the meanwhile with Bar Watch.
For clarification, Councillor Stevenson, is that to roll back the hours possible from 4 a.m. to 3 a.m. for the remainder of the trial period? Is that what you're asking?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Next, we have Councillor Green.
Oh, thank you, Your Worship. Oh, Your Deputy Worship. I had a brief talk with the chair of Community Services and Budget Standing Committee, and he agreed that we could hear a delegation at that committee from the Vancouver Art Gallery to talk about the master planning process that they're going on, that's going on with them. So that would be the meeting of May the 18th.
And you're looking for council approval of that?
Yes, I believe we have to get approval to put something on that agenda.
So Councillor Green has asked that council receive that committee at the May 18th date. Is that acceptable? Seeing no opposition, I assume that's all right with everyone. May 18th is the date. Councillor Sullivan.
Yes, last week the former city manager of Los Angeles came to Vancouver to volunteer his time to alert citizens of Vancouver to some of the problems he felt we would be getting into with the ward system. It was widely covered in the press. I think he did a wonderful job to volunteer his time to come up. But during our meetings, some people did challenge one of my contentions from the council meeting several months ago. Actually, it was about 2 months ago when we published a poll that was paid for by this council, in which we asked 602 citizens what were their 6 most important issues on their mind for the city. And they reported that 1% of them had said the ward system. And when I actually asked for some clarification later that week, they checked into their files and they found that, in fact, only one person had mentioned it out of 602. So we're looking at a 0.15% of the population feel that it's an important issue in the top 6. I've been challenged several times. People don't believe me.
Councillor Sullivan, Councillor Sullivan, if you could stop for a minute.
Sure.
We're under new business. New business requires that you're asking for something.
I am. I would like to ask our staff, look back in their files and count those 602, and perhaps there was more than one person, and I'd be very happy to get that number officially so that I'm not challenged in public on that number. Thank you.
So you're asking for staff for a memo from staff
to look into the 602 people and to find out if there was indeed more than one person that considered the ward system as their top 6 priorities. So yeah, I'm getting challenged in public on that, and I think it would be useful for us to have that knowledge. Thank you.
On the question, and I will test the House on the question of whether or not we should expend our monies in that fashion. So I will. Are you moving that as that is a motion? I consider that a motion. I'm not going to ask for notice on it. It is a motion. It is always a motion. And I'm asking that. Do you have a seconder? Councillor Ladner has seconded. All in favor? Discussion on the motion. I'll clear the board, and if you want to have discussion, then we will have it. Discussion on the motion. Councillor Green.
Thank you. I consider this another frivolous motion by Councillor Sullivan and Councillor Ladner. We go into this all the time where they're putting staff out on doing a ton of work that's absolutely unnecessary. Who really cares if it was 2 or 3 or 1? No one came to hear this fellow that Councillor Sullivan brought up. It's kind of his swan song of trying to fight against wards because he doesn't believe he can be elected in any system that we can think up. So I would say this is really a waste of time and money for our staff, and insulting also.
Thank you, Councillor Green. Councillor Ladner.
I think this would take approximately 5, maybe 10 minutes of staff time. I think Councillor Green is insulting our staff to suggest it would be a ton of work for them to find this out. It's a very small thing. We've just asked for another memo without any discussion or motions or seconding or anything else. So I just think it's a totally small deal, and why not just let them do it? Let the staff do it and clear it up.
For Councillor Ladner's clarity, whenever any item is introduced on the council floor requesting staff take action, that de facto is a motion. If council does not either call notice on that motion or require a vote to be taken on it, then it's adopted on consent. In this case here, I'm asking that a vote be taken on this issue. Both Councillor Stevenson and both Councillor Green's motions were adopted on consent. That has been previously explained to Council, I believe, on a number of occasions. Councillor Bass, on the motion.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. What are we voting on here? What exactly are we being asked?
Mr. Clerk, could you read the motion?
Councillor Sullivan has asked staff to look back in the files for a survey where 602 citizens were asked what were the most important issues, and to see if more than one person stated the ward system was the most important issue they were interested in. In the top 6.
Satisfied? Councillor Sullivan.
Well, first of all, I'd like to disagree with Councillor Ladner. In fact, it wouldn't take 5 minutes. I phoned, and it took about 30 to 40 seconds. She went into the files, and they do have it. The only thing I'm interested in is something in writing, because people don't believe me, and I suppose perhaps this council doesn't believe me either, that the entire population of people that really feel strongly about this is probably in this council chamber, and it seems to be of a great interest to this council. But I think by having the information, it would give the citizens more information to work with. I do not believe we should be hiding information from the citizens, and I certainly believe that the citizens should have the information, because I certainly believe they should have the right ultimately to decide, and not this council as you are planning to do. I think we should have a referendum on this issue, and this information will help in that. Thank you.
Councillor Green.
Thank you. I mean, we have a whole process that's going on out there, and Councillor Sullivan has a problem that no one believes in. Well, I wonder why. Frivolous questions all the time, wasting staff, running around in circles, trying to make up something to get an issue. For God's sake, folks, we have homeless people, we have all kinds of things going on in the city, and this is what you want our staff to be working on. You've already asked them once. The fact that you don't have credibility and people won't believe you cannot be addressed by our staff. That's the problem that you have to deal with. You shouldn't try to put it onto our staff. And I think that when you get to the pearly gates, they're going to send you to be in a permanent Monty Python skit.
Thank you, Councillor Green. Councillor Bass.
Yeah, Councillor, Mr. Chair, I'm very pleased that Councillor Green has Councillor Sullivan going to the pearly gates, as opposed to other alternatives.
Councillor Bass, please.
But I would say that I am going to, since I do believe this will take a matter of seconds, and since I'll never be against information, even though I think this is somewhat frivolous, I will vote for it. Thank you.
Councillor Lewis.
Well, I don't have a lot to add to what Councillor Bass just said. My words were going to be somewhat the same, although slightly different. You know, the irony is that we have literally, not figuratively, but literally spent more time debating this item, and as a result of, and directly as a result of spending the time debating it, consumed staff time. Consumed not just the staff time of one person, a person writing the report, or the memo, or the one-liner, but the time of all the staff that are here wondering when on earth the meeting will come to an end. We've actually spent more time on this item than it would take to actually do the one-liner. I would ditto what Councillor Bass says. I'm never opposed to an information request. If it's a minor item, this is a minor item. Let's approve it in the blink of an eye, and let's move on.
Thank you, Councillor Lewis. Seeing no other speakers, question, all in favor of the motion? Opposed? Councillor Green is opposed, and Councillor Louis is opposed. The board is clear. Were there, oh, no, it's not. Councillor Woodsworth, new business.
I'd like to move a leave of absence for...
We are under new business, and it is appropriate.
Thank you. I would like to move a leave of absence for civic business for Councillor David Cadman for today's council meeting. And I'd also like to move a leave of absence for Ann Roberts for the CS&B meeting on April the 8th.
I believe April the 8th is passed.
May. Sorry, I think she meant May the 8th. Thank you.
Thursday, this coming Thursday. I got the date.
Um,
It's April 22nd.
For
Should we consider Councillor Cadman's motion first, and I'll let you and Councillor Roberts work that out first?
April 22nd.
all right, on the first one, it's for today.
So Councillor Cadman, all in favor of Councillor Cadman? Point of order, Councillor Ladner.
Do we have the power to do retroactive
Well,
City Clerk.
this meeting is not over yet, I'm not sure I'm ready to answer the question of doing it retroactively, but I think the motion's appropriate.
Okay.
I had asked the clerk at what time I should ask this, and he said at this time.
So thank you.
It's amazing
All in
to-
favor of the motion for Councillor Cadman? Opposed? All approved unanimously. Have Councillor Woodsworth, have you have the date?
I'm moving leave of absence for civic business for Councillor Ann Roberts for the CSNB meeting on April 22nd.
CSNB, April 22nd, civic business, Councillor Roberts. Leave of, not civic business. Discussion, all in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously. Next, we have Councillor Bass under new business.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Two items. We live in a car-addicted society, Mr. Chair, and we spend a certain amount of money and a lot of our land just creating parking spaces for citizens with cars. I would like to ask for a memo. I understand that actually engineering is now looking at options in terms of parking. And I'd like to ask for a memo back on charging a daily, weekly, or monthly charge for parking on the streets in those locations where there are currently no parking charges, and to look at related practices in other municipal jurisdictions.
Okay.
So in other words, basically charging people for parking on the street where there are no now designated charges. And I'm asking for a memo. I happen to know that engineering staff is reviewing parking policy.
Seeing no opposition, that's... Yes?
That sounds like a pretty big deal.
Just a minute.
This isn't a minor issue. So I'm just wondering from city manager, is this a big issue? It sounds like a big issue.
Comments from City Manager?
Well, my comment would be that if the city engineers are working on it, I think it probably is a fairly big deal for us to look at all the streets that don't have designated parking fees related to them. I'm not sure you're going to get a memo back as quickly as you think, or would like, perhaps, Councillor Bass, but if it can be embodied in some of the other work that the engineering department is doing and become part of reporting out, noting that that's of particular interest to you, that's probably more likely what we could accommodate.
That's actually what I'm asking for, but I just want formally recorded that I am asking for that to engineering.
So the intent,
I'm not in a rush.
The intent is to incorporate what you've asked for within the forthcoming report from engineering. And
exactly.
Okay.
That makes sense to me.
Yeah,
Thank
sure.
you.
No, that's what I'm looking for. I have a second thing, and that is another memo, and I'm not sure, this is a new area for me, but you see, this represents 4 editions of inserts for a weekly newspaper that I won't mention, but that gets delivered twice a week to my door. This is, so I'm asking for a memo on options that newspapers might have for replacing advertising inserts. Clearly, I don't know how many people get this every 2 weeks, but this is a lot of trees, and we can do better than this. We're now in the 3rd millennium. We can do better than this. So I would ask for a memo on options that newspapers have for replacing advertising inserts.
So for clarity, Councillor Bass, are you asking for staff to integrate with public or private business?
No, I'm asking
on the
for,
issue of inserts in newspapers?
Sorry, no, I'm asking for consideration of possible bylaws, municipal actions that would regulate
the number of inserts or inserts in general?
Inserts, or might address the solid waste management costs of there would be various approaches that one could take.
Councillor Bass, I know where you're going. I'm not sure but whether that's possible or not, but perhaps the city manager could tackle this one.
I'm not sure the city manager wants to tackle this one. Certainly in the context of recycling, sustainability, what might happen with the inserts that are included in the newspapers, I don't think you're asking us to tell the newspapers how to run their business. I think you're asking us about how we might look at recycling and work with the amount of recycling material that seems to come to your door every day, and that perhaps that would be one of the contexts we could look at it in.
Yeah, this generates dollar costs in terms of solid waste recycling to the city of Vancouver, to citizens of Vancouver, and it also generates environmental costs for not only the citizens of Vancouver but the rest of the planet. And I am sure we're not the only city in the world that might think of possible ways of approaching this. Maybe some alternatives to suggest, or some ways of making the user or the person who benefits pay for at least the direct cost to us.
So you're asking for staff to try to identify the direct costs associated with inserts?
No, I'm saying that options that newspapers have for dealing with the costs of advertising inserts and with municipal bylaws that might minimize the volume of those inserts.
City manager?
I'm not really convinced the way that's framed that it's really within the jurisdiction of the city, and at this point I feel uncomfortable suggesting that it's something that we could even do in the context of private enterprise and what the newspaper industry is doing. For us to get into a discussion with them about how they pay for their productions is really...
City manager, perhaps I can help. Would it be sufficient if we were to look at trying to identify the costs associated with the amount of material produced by advertisement in newspapers and ultimately going through a cycle of use and then recycling, and the costs associated with that on a number of scopes and scales, and that we try to look for a way to do a bit of cost recovery, if in fact that's possible. Does that articulate what you're looking for?
That's a good start. I think that's...
Is that any clearer, or is that possible?
Well, it's a lot of work,
yes.
And maybe through our sustainability work that we're doing, and certainly the recycling. I mean, that's certainly newspapers are a big part of our recycling program, of which many of the ads that you're talking about, we already,
Perhaps, Councillor Bass, I could suggest that we refer the matter to the Cool Vancouver Task Force, and that as part of their work, they'd be looking at that aspect to a certain degree.
We already have asked a question about fast food debris. That is,
and that's where that is exactly where we referred that issue.
Did we send it to engineering, or did we send it to Cool Vancouver? I thought we sent it to engineering.
Could I make a suggestion that you having put this on the table, let me take some time and look at what we might be able to respond with and where we might do, without undertaking a huge amount of work.
No, I'm not asking you for huge. I'm just saying let's look at the direct costs we have, and also let's look and see if there are other municipalities.
Councillor Bass, could I suggest that you sit down with the city manager and clarify the issues until at such point in time where we can take action?
Yeah, I'll be happy to do that.
Thank you, Councillor Bass. We're back into the queue mode, and Councillor Ladner under new business.
If I may be allowed the liberty of just to comment on the last...
No,
point.
you should not. This is under new business. It's new business, and I remind council that we have a public hearing tonight.
Okay, I have a question. I would like to ask whether Councillor Bass would be willing to volunteer to the Courier newspaper to pay for the newspaper himself and not get it for free.
Councillor Ladner, that's out of order. We're looking for direction that you would ask of staff not to direct it to other councillors, please refrain from that.
I'll have an offline conversation with
Yes,
Councillor Bass.
thank
I
you.
have some suggestions for him, and a short lesson in newspaper economics. What you get for free, someone
New
has to pay
business,
for.
Councillor Ladner.
It's come to my attention that there have been some discussions that have come out of the Vancouver City Planning Commission related to the Property Endowment Fund. None of this has ever surfaced at council. We're talking about $1 billion in city assets that's, well, if I may be glib about it, that's in play, or that's under discussion as to what we should do with it, how we should invest the money. There are questions about the policies regarding the Property Endowment Fund. This is a very large amount of money. It's a very big deal for the city. It's a big safety foundation for a lot of things that we do. And I would like to hear from the city manager, not necessarily now, but at some point, as to what is going on with the Property Endowment Fund, what plans, if any, are there for changing the policies that govern it, and could we have something in council where we can talk about this in a more open forum? Is that in order? I don't know whether you want to do that now or I can wait.
Well,
City manager.
I would like to get back to council on the Property Endowment Fund in a more formal sense, bringing forward a report.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I have a second question. We are creating an increasing number of live-work spaces in this city, and next, some meeting coming up very soon, we're going to be talking about shifting taxes from residential to commercial or not, or commercial to residential. I would like to know what policy we have, if any, for defining whether what live-work premises are taxed at a commercial rate and at a residential rate, because I understand that there's some uncertainty out in the marketplace there. People have woken up to the fact that commercial is taxed at 5 times the rate of residential. If they're in a live-work space, they may find that their taxes are 5 times higher if it's classified as commercial than if it's residential. If they're doing both, who decides and how whether it's a workspace or a living space? And I don't know what the answer is to that, and I think it'd be pretty important to know that, and a lot of people would like to know that. It would have a big impact on our city finances to know that.
So that'd be a memo back from, okay, thank you, Councillor Ladner. Councillor Green.
I'm dropping off and I'll come back.
Councillor Stevenson.
Thank you. I would like to ask for a leave of absence for Councillor Green from CS&D on May the 6th for city business.
Do we have a seconder?
Second.
Councillor Bass seconds that. All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously. Councillor Green, you're next.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to also explain why I'm asking for that. I'm the representative from Vancouver on the Greater Vancouver Housing Commission, and their meetings happen at the same time as our community services and budget meeting every 2 weeks, or every once a month.
Councillor Green?
Yeah.
I see another speaker under new business, and if it has passed, and if you want to explain it.
I just wanted to clarify that, and it's a difficulty. The next thing is, I'd like to ask for a memo back on the role of the Vancouver City Planning Commission and its rights and duties as an advisory body to this council. I don't think that everyone understands it. And then I have one other item. Last week we had a tragic death of a person named Ray Kondo, who is one of Vancouver's best-known local musicians. His actual name was Ray Tremblay, but he was called Ray Kondo because while he was pursuing his art form, a lot of times he was couch surfing, and people made a joke that he was a one-man condo, and that's how he got the name. But he went to the Emily Carr School of College of Arts and Design, and he's a very well-known country swing musician who has played in France and Poland, and is a member of the Rockabilly Hall of Fame. So it's a great loss to our city, and I just wanted to make note of that.
Thank you, Councillor Green. More appropriate under inquiries and other matters. Councillor Ladner.
Just have a further comment on newspapers that I should have mentioned earlier.
Not comment, asking for some action. If you want to have a comment,
I'm
wait
asking
until the next section.
for anybody in this room, including the mayor's staff over there in full force, anybody who would like to have some input in issues such as what Councillor Bass just raised regarding waste, liquid or solid. We're having a workshop tomorrow all day at the GBRD on that very topic, and as I am your representative, I would be happy to take any messages to that workshop. Second item, do we have any control over parking policies in Stanley Park, which are raising a lot of indignation these days? I don't know whether that's a Park Board matter.
That is a Parks
It is a
Board
Parks
matter.
Board matter.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ladner. We are now into inquiries and other matters. This is where it doesn't actually have to be a motion to ask staff to take action, but it may be. And the board is clear, so I'll take my opportunity. I happened to be at the grand opening of a launch of a Power Shop, Power Save program that's occurring in Chinatown. Seeing as we received a environmental award today by purchasing green certificates, this is an environmentally friendly bag where you go to Chinatown and you shop again and again. There are a number of coupons available, and I encourage people to revitalize our area. This is part of the city's participation, along with the Government of Canada's, and through Western Diversification. And I'm hoping that people take us up on that offer and help us revitalize not only Chinatown, the Hastings Corridor, and Gastown as well. And seeing as there's no other speakers, motion to adjourn. Thank you, Councillor Lewis. We're going in camera. See you there in a few minutes.